Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is the second Fathers for Pixels YouTube panel session. My name is Anusha Kandasivam. I am your moderator for this session. Through Fathers for Pixels, the Fathers for Pixels YouTube panel sessions, the Pixel Project is providing a platform and learning resource for fathers across the world to step up and speak out about the importance of combating violence against women. This is our inaugural series. This year we are collaborating with Men Challenging and Fathering Together. These are two organizations comprising men who are working towards a more equitable and violence-free world for women and girls by actively addressing sexism, misogyny, and toxic masculinity among their male peers. This June's Fathers of Pixels campaign features 12 fathers from Asia, Europe, North America. We have a very diverse range of people. Each live stream YouTube session will feature 3 fathers discussing a topic that links fatherhood and how dads can help stop violence against women in their families, in their communities, and in their cultures. Each session will also include a live moderated Q&A session for dads and communities to ask questions. So today's YouTube session is only our second ever Fathers for Pixels panel session. Our topic today is Raising Good Men, Shaping Boys into Men Who Respect Women and Girls. So here is our panel. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
So today's YouTube session is a very special one. We have here with us 3 fathers who have spent years working in one capacity or another to eradicate violence against women and to advocate for a more positive masculinity in a more gender equitable world. So let me introduce them. I'll start with Dr. Prem Kumar Vijayan. He received his Master's in Philosophy in English from Delhi University and received his PhD from the International Institute of Social Studies in The Hague. His thesis was recently published as a book, Gender and Hindu Nationalism, Understanding Masculine Hegemony. PK is the father of a son and a daughter, and he lives in Delhi in India. And next we have Britt Homburg. He's a clinical social worker with a decade of experience providing mental health services to a wide area of populations in the Chicagoland area in the US. Britt uses a strengths-based approach to support clients in identifying their core values and finding their voice. Britt's interests include mindfulness, anti-racist practice, spirituality, and group work. You may run into him on the bike path, a community march, one of the city's great restaurants, or at a playground with his 2 young children. And finally, we have Davud Grosic, who is from Slovenia. He has 2 beautiful children. He runs a life coaching business where he works with men to show them how to understand and manage their emotions. The first thing he does is find what is causing the behavior they want to change and why it is happening, and so that they can work to end violence in their families and in their communities. So one more thing before we start our discussion, you, the audience, you can participate as well. You may ask the panel questions. Just make sure you're logged onto your YouTube account so you can type your questions into the chat box on the right of your YouTube screen. That's the right. And Xiaoqin, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay the questions to me and I will read them out to the panel to answer. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to lead you guys in. One of the most deadly manifestations of sexism, misogyny, and gender inequality in societies and cultures across the world is violence against women, VAW, which is overwhelmingly perpetrated by men. According to the United Nations, approximately 70% of VAW is perpetrated by men on women who know them. Yet, gender-based violence is still widely regarded by society as something that women bring on themselves, and the onus is on women, even young girls, to prevent and avoid this violence. We see this in prescribed gender behavior for women and girls. Don't wear clothing men could perceive as sexual, don't drink socially, don't go out late at night, or don't even go out into public spaces at all. And in sometimes vitriolic victim blaming of women and girls in cases of domestic violence, rape, and sexual assault. Now, in contrast, violence and other misogynistic and toxic masculine behavior in boys and men are quite often excused as boys will be boys, or a result of being provoked by the women and the girls they attack. We are holding this panel today because while men are the main perpetrators of violence against women and girls, they are also part of the solution. If we could raise a generation of men who are not sexist or misogynist, who treat women and girls with respect and as equals, it would really contribute to a significant reduction in violence against women. So with that in mind, the most obvious question to kick off this discussion is, as fathers yourself, have you ever been guilty of unconscious gender bias when parenting your sons versus parenting your daughters? Shall we start with Davud?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. No, I really, when I see that question, I was just looking back all this time when my son born, and now, no, I didn't. I really teach them both the same in a way that they understand behaviors. My approach to them is that, as I said, that they learn how I behave. So when I behave to my daughter, I behave nice to her, and when I behave to my son, I behave nice to him. So no, I was really this was really awesome question, and I was really going back to see if there's some part of their lives that I behave to someone in that way, and how I never know. So I'm really happy.
Tell us how old your children are, though.
My daughter is 3 years, and the son will be next month, 1 year.
So you're basically starting from the very beginning.
Yeah.
What about you, Britt?
Yeah, also thank you so much for having me and for just having this really important conversation. I have 2 children. I have a 6-year-old who identifies as a girl and a 3.5-year-old who identifies as a boy. And I would say, yeah, I mean, it's not something I'm proud of, but I have had a lot of unconscious bias in raising my children and just sort of, and just as a male in the U.S. I think that having children has helped me to sort of come to the realization that I am sexist, and that I have benefited from being a male, and it's caused me to really challenge a lot of those biases that I'm not proud to say that I have, but I know that this is sort of in the U.S. this is how I was raised, and I've absorbed these things from people around me, from teachers, from parents, from my community, and I'm working hard to not have my own children absorb those same biases. So I realize that I have the biases, but it's kind of like Davud, I'm really trying to sort of actively challenge them so that my children don't grow up with those same biases.
Okay. And PK?
Again, I mean, thank you for having me on the show, and it's a very important issue. I'd like to pick up from where Britt left off. Echoing everything he said, I think we were all at one point or another guilty of behaving in a biased fashion. And the quirky thing about your question is actually that the moment you're guilty, you're conscious, so you can't really be accused of unconscious bias anymore. If you feel guilty about it, you're doing it consciously, but you're still feeling guilty, right? So in one sense, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, because my son is indicating to me that he can't hear anything on YouTube, so
Okay.
maybe there might be something happening there. Anyway,
So perhaps just speak a bit louder. It's fine.
Yeah. All right. So basically, the point I was leading up to making was that there are some biases that I actively practice. For example, the idea that girls shouldn't go out alone at night. In a city like Delhi, I wouldn't consider that a bias, although it might be perceived as a bias, and I would not allow my daughter to go out alone at night. let me give you an analogy. It would be a bit like stopping swimmers from going into shark-infested waters. You know, that's not really curtailing their liberation or their liberty. It is actually preventing them from getting bitten. So you have a whole bunch of these sharks outside on the roads here, and I don't want her to be in a position where she'd have to fight or get harmed by them, right? It's a tricky question because at the same time, obviously, she's a teenager. She's coming into the age where she wants to go out and she wants to exercise her space and her freedom and so on. So I try to make that my partner and I, we both try to make that as possible and as feasible as we can. But sometimes one's circumstances also decide how one relates to the biases that are outside in society, right? They may not be something that you yourself want to believe in or want to practice, but for reasons beyond your control, in a sense, you are forced to practice them. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think I understand what you mean. It's how society works outside and things are beyond your control. So the easiest way to control danger is to tell your daughter that you can't do certain things. I guess we all know that it's not her fault. It's actually the fault of the men outside. But it takes a long time for people to change their behaviors. Which sort of brings me to my next question. So teaching boys to respect women and girls and teaching them early is a crucial part of building a culture of gender equality and stopping violence against women. However, it's a challenging prospect for parents because many societies, especially conservative ones, use tradition and culture to justify and enforce double standards according to the gender binary. One set of standards for men and boys and men, one set of standards for women and girls. How can fathers teach their sons about gender equality while in this situation, while still enabling them to appreciate the richness of their culture? Perhaps we go back to PK and then go back around.
Okay, I actually have a lot to say on this. So tell me to shut up whenever you think I'm going on too much. I think the first thing is to I mean, it's a very important and a very difficult question that you've posed. The first thing is to understand, I think, that probably globally, almost there is probably no culture that is not a patriarchal culture, right? And when you start with that realization, I think it's you immediately see, excuse me, that working for gender equality can often mean working against that patriarchal culture, inevitably, right? So it becomes very difficult to maintain an interest in or in pursuing gender equality and simultaneously sort of supporting one's or promoting one's idea of the richness of this culture, right? So I think it's a good idea to ask us as what we mean by this word culture, and for me it means it's a way of relating to people. It's a structured way in which we relate to people, right? We either accept certain practices or we reject them, and through that acceptance we become part of a community, right? And that's the culture of that community. When we reject those practices, we run the danger of being pushed out of that community as well, right? So it's very often not just about the richness of a culture, but about cultural identity and how one sees oneself in relation to a particular community, right? And people, from what I've seen, people tend to hesitate to push for gender equality precisely because they don't want to be seen as betraying their communities or breaking the norms of their communities, right?
Have you faced such difficulties in
Absolutely. Let me give you from my own personal uh, life. I am quote unquote a Hindu. I was born a Hindu. My partner is a Christian, um, and you straight away have, in a country that's so steeped in religious identities like India, you straight away have these two very edgy boundaries being drawn. So what constitutes the right way to bring up a child by following Hindu customs would not necessarily be the right way in a Christian household, and so and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So the the issue, I think, for us when we were bringing up our kids was also um, to to maintain these divisive elements outside the household, as it were, to decide that we would create our own customs, our own traditions, our own conventions
Okay.
within our own home space. So there are some very abnormal things that happen in our household. For example, my children have taken my wife's name. They don't they haven't followed the patronymic. They followed the matronymic. That is my you know. Normally, you take the father's name as your
Mm-hmm.
surname, and in my case, we've insisted that they take my partner's name. So starting from there, it becomes a breaking down of certain kinds of cultural precedents or uh, expectations. Yeah, I'm going to stop and let you ask other
Okay.
questions to other people as well.
Let's go to Brit for that question.
Yeah.
How can fathers teach their sons about gender equality while still enabling them to appreciate the richness of their culture? And have you faced any what are some of the difficulties that you face when trying to do this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think um, I think it's sort of incumbent on each generation to kind of question what the culture that we are born into and that we're socialized into, and take the parts of it that are life-giving and that are really meaningful and powerful, but then also have really be critical and sort of deconstruct the parts of it that aren't life-giving. And I think that looks really different depending on the particular culture and that context. And so I can really only speak for where I'm at in terms of in the U.S. and Chicago, but I think that it is a challenge, right? It's sort of like swimming upstream, because like this is the air that we breathe, that we all breathe, and when you start to question it, and you start to ask these questions, people sometimes they get defensive, right? They think you're judging them, because you're like, we have been very open to like letting our children wear the clothing that they feel most comfortable in, and that feels, that helps them express themselves and their gender. And we've gotten looks from people, and we've gotten questions from family like, why would you let your boy dress up in a dress, and we just say there's lots of ways to be a boy, there's many ways to be a girl, and same thing with our daughter, right? So I think really, and like that brought up stuff for me too, right? Like when my child would my boy would do pretend play and start to say, call me this name, of which is typically a girl, and I would say, oh, I'm not sure if I'm okay with that. But then if he says, call me a dog, right, and let me be a dog, I'm okay with that. So I think it's really important to respect. For me, it's been helpful to see gender as on a spectrum, and to see how my own gender development was really limited by sort of toxic masculinity and this belief that there's only one way to be a man, and that is by exerting power over others, specifically women, dominating other men, and that never felt right to me. Although like I said, there were times when I have engaged in that, And so like being a parent has actually helped me to kind of heal from that and say, I'm not going to repeat that. But yeah, there are definitely consequences, and we've had to have difficult conversations with friends or family members, although most people are supportive and they sort of appreciate kind of that being challenged and you know, thinking about gender and certainly gender equality in new ways.
Okay. How about you, David?
Awesome answers. What I did is I have a different approach to life, and in the way that I also came from culture that's really really strong. I don't know how to say offensive to women, but I get out from that because I start questioning all the rules. Okay, I realize that we are just living in I say one room. That's culture. That's, I don't know, religion. I'm not offensive, but just opening mind. It is rules, and if you broke the rules, then you are not good man or something like that. So I start questioning all that. Hey, what they want me to become? Okay, and when I ask myself, is that okay? Is that right? I start getting the right answers. And when I ask myself, okay, this is what I'm teaching, not just myself, all my family. When my brother start talking something that's not okay, I say to him, hey, what you want to be known for? Okay, what you want to be known for? To talk some stuff that it's not okay, even if you don't know it's true. So what I did here is, it's like they said it's challenging in that way. If we look at the culture that we depend to them, okay, if we depend to culture, it's difficult. But if we have a chance to step out and just ask ourselves some questions about, okay, how that influence on me, on my life, on my children, because Britt have an awesome approach to when he said that his daughter identify here as a woman or something like that. Yeah, I told my girlfriend that, look, we get these kids to 18. That they said to 18 years that I have to make sure that everything is okay with them. But I say that the moment they're born, I cannot control them. I can just teach them. I can just tell them, show them, hey, this is okay, this is not okay. But she or he can do in a way that, because this is their life. I cannot. This is not like a dog. I have a dog. Even if you have a dog, you cannot just, okay, you are here and now you're under my command. If I say eat, you eat. No. This is not life. This is not approach to life. So I'm really happy when I see that a lot of people open their mind before they open their mouth. That's awesome, because then we start questioning, and when you start questioning, your focus is going in another way. So it's a challenging when if I look to my culture, when I come from, because my culture is Islam, and there's a lot of things happening that I'm not supporting that. I'm not against religion. I'm spiritual man. I'm really happy that everybody who believe in God and everything. But I came the question that get me out from all of that. I ask myself, listen, if I believe in God, universe, or intelligent, no matter, is the same. So if I believe in God, and there's a quote that God made us in His way. So if I'm made in a God's way and women are made in a God's way, so if I behave to a woman in a way that I don't respect her, I beat her, so what I'm doing to God? But I'm believing in God. So what's happening here? So in that way, when I start asking myself really that question, deep questions, I say, okay, the religion have rules. I'm not playing by that rules. I'm just take rules that is going to help me to grow in a way that I understand life better. But I can make my own rules in a way that I understand and that I respect everybody around myself. Because one thing I realize, and this is what really changed my life, is when I found out that it's not people behavior that obsess me, or it's my rules in my mind. So if I have a rule, hey, Brit cannot sit like that. If Brit's sitting like that, then I have to be angry. This is my belief. This is rules that I make in my mind. This is what culture doing to men. They say you're a man. No matter what you do, you have to be respected. That's the rule. So in that way, yeah, it's challenging. I'd say it's challenging. Maybe here in Slovenia is not so challenging because there's a lot of different cultures and a lot of different approaches. But yeah, in a global, it's really challenging and really interesting, because I started to ask myself, hey, where the sexism come from? Are we men afraid from women? Why? So that way I start, why we need that? Why we need that? In a way, no matter woman, man, but where that come from? Nobody teaching us when you're born. Nobody say, hey, welcome to the world of sexism. You can do this, everything is now. So, yeah, it's just made up from reason. So there's a reason behind this. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, if I talk too much, just stop.
Yeah, well, speaking of sexism, sexism is unfortunately embedded in almost all aspects of life in societies, and it takes many forms in different cultures. So in some cultures, for example, women eat separately from men after the men have eaten, which I've experienced before. Sometimes women are not allowed in certain public spaces. There's certain behaviors that are prescribed to women and certain behaviors prescribed to men. Do you feel that it's important to talk to your sons about what many people consider normal, or the normal behavior, or just minor things that people do every day? Do you consider that important, or do you prefer to teach them about big issues like domestic violence first? Let's go with Davud, since you have very young children, and then we'll go backwards.
Yeah, that's really, I see this, it's really important to, I have this, I call it step 4, but when I get to the pain, so I get to the issue, I look what make that issue happen. So why we doing this? Okay. And then what I teach my kid, if something happen in any way, I teach her, look, what happened that you do this? So now she know what is pain. And then I ask her, okay, what is this about? So this is step pain. What is this about? And then I ask her, do you want to treat yourself like that, like you treat your brother? She said no. So I asked her, okay, if you don't want to treat yourself, why are you treating your brother? How is that? And then she get answers. It's not, so yeah, it's not that I treat my girlfriend, hey, first I'm going to eat it, then you're going to eat it. In that way, as I said, I always ask myself where that came from, because we are all the human and we are all the same. So yeah, I just want to prefer to, I don't know, everyone can have their approach, and that's awesome, because we people are different, and that makes us unique, that makes us unbelievable, outstanding human beings. But if you approach to something just in a surface, that you just get that ice pick and don't go deep into the water to see what's causing this issue, then we cannot start putting down that mountain. But if you get to the foundation and see what's causing that behavior outside, then you will win. Then everything happened. The change happened in instant. Sometimes people say to me, Davud, the change need time. No. Procrastination need time. If you want to procrastinate, my friend, you can do it for 10 years and nothing will change in your life. If you want to change, you can change right now. How? First, change your focus. Change your focus, change your point of view. Okay, if you want to see people different, change your point of view. In that way, so this is how I teach my daughter, because she's a little bit older than my son, and sometimes she just start to picking him or something, and then I ask her, hey, listen, it's the same. You want to treat yourself like that. If you want, be my guest. If not, so be my guest too, but don't do that to someone else. In that way, yeah. So yeah, I really going to issue. First is an issue, the global, and then we can get to this little things to put our puzzles together and to see this big picture, what's really happening all around the world, and how can I help in a way like one human being to just spark a fire to other men's, and we get all that big fire. So it's the same if you are in a really dark room and someone just take a phone outside and turn on the light. There's one light. If 10 people do that, there we have a fire. So that way.
How about you, Britt? Do you think big issues first or small things, or both?
Yeah, I think it's sort of more both, and it's sort of like what's coming up for my child or what's going on sort of in the world. And I think we try to sort of teach our children like a framework for sort of thinking about issues of injustice, and specifically around sexism and also racism too. And I have to give my partner credit for this. She has a way of talking about it that I found to be really helpful. She says, sexism is a lie. It's a lie that men are better than women, and we don't believe that lie in our family. And then sort of like what Davud was saying, like asking questions about why that isn't true, and talking about friends or family to sort of disprove that lie. And that, because children have, they have an idea of a lie and how harmful that can be. It's a helpful script for them to sort of think about the world. So if it's something, so I think we use that sort of discussion if we're talking about something kind of small, quote unquote small, like you were talking about, just sort of everyday cultural shifts. Like, this person believes that only women should be cooking, and is that, can only women cook? Is that part of the lie of sexism? Does your dad like to cook? Yes. Okay. Do you like to cook? Yes. And so kind of like using that as a way to help them challenge when they see the lie, whether it's like a sort of like everyday lie, or it's a sort of like lie on a big scale. That's a more systemic kind of sexism that they're witnessing or asking about.
Okay. PK?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's both. But that said, I would also say that I don't think there's a one-size-fit-all solution to these issues. I think there's a lot of difference in the way in which girls and boys are brought up in very individual-centric societies like you find in Europe or in North America, as opposed to, say, the more well, in our societies, for example, in South Asia, you have joint families where the individual is sort of deeply embedded in the family, and a lot of what the boys and girls learn about being boys and girls is drawn not just from their parents, but from how they see the family itself structured, right? It can be very traumatic for people to break out of that and to sort of, push a line that says, well, I'm going to follow a gender equality system or principles that don't fit in with those joint family ideals or even the larger kind of social norms. Which makes it, you realize then that it's not just about addressing the everyday issues of whether the girl will eat after the boy, or the partner, the wife will eat after the husband, or whether the domestic work will be done by the women and the work outside will be done by the men, and so on. You can't separate the question of domestic violence from these issues as well. I think domestic violence to a large extent is made possible by these kinds of prejudices and discriminations that happen at a micro level, at an everyday level. So it may not escalate everywhere and in exactly the same way to a domestic violence situation, but that's what makes it possible. And breaking out of that, dealing with domestic violence, while still retaining those other forms of discrimination, those other forms of prejudice, as often happens. For example, we know, I'm sure you all know that there's an enormous amount of sexual violence in India, right? Especially in Delhi, where I am, and the response in the public imagination is often to increase the punishment and make harsher laws focused specifically at the issue of rape, of sexual violence. But if you don't address those other forms of discrimination that are routine, that are everyday, then that's never really going to change, is it?
Mm.
So I think it's not an either or thing. It has to be both.
Yeah.
Right. Right. It's pretty cool that all of you kind of agreed with that as both. So we have a comment and question from the audience. Oops, sorry, wrong one. Joseph Samelin, who asked if he would like to know the extent to which all of you feel or have felt comfortable talking with other fathers in your life about all this stuff in a personal context. PK, we go backwards again. PK?
I think that's a very important question, and I think it's a very, again, not an easy question to answer, because very often the other dads one knows in one's. Let me not talk too abstractly. Let me speak from a personal point of view here. A lot of my own friends are friends I've grown up with, and they remain, in a sense, steeped in the prejudices and the gender biases that they grew up with, that I grew up with, right? And if I've changed, and if I'm still changing, and I'm still sort of working on myself, and that I think that's one of the remarkable things about gender work. It never stops. You do it all your life, and you keep working at yourself. You keep sort of remaining alert to what you can do to change yourself. One of the ways in which that happens is through such conversations with other men, with other fathers, and seeing how they parent their children, especially their boys. And these conversations can be tricky. They can be, at one level, very personal. The father you're talking to might see it as a kind of interference, might see it as a kind of, patronizing attitude, that you are telling him how to bring up his son. Or he might take it receptively and say, well, okay, I didn't think of it like that, and I need to think about what you said, and might even take it on board in actually changing the way he relates to his son. But it certainly affects the way in which I relate to my son, and it makes me more alert to those biases, because after all, those fathers and I have come from the same background. So I, in a sense, see a mirror of me, which I have to correct, when I talk to them. So
you're learning from each other, basically. I'm curious, how comfortable is it for you, PK, to talk to other fathers like this? Because I speak as a person who is culturally Indian as well. Asian fathers don't really talk. So how comfortable do you feel?
I think I have to say that it's been difficult, and when I talk to other fathers, it's usually in a very bantering, jokey kind of way, because it's not always possible to come straight to the serious point. It makes people uncomfortable. It's much easier to do that with women. I find it's easier to talk to my female colleagues. But I'm very happy to talk to them, because it's they relate, and they respond. But for example, if I talk to my colleagues in college about parenting, not very many of them will respond with a lot of interest. They may be interested, but they would also feel uncomfortable about talking about it.
Interesting, a
You know?
cultural thing, I guess.
Yeah.
How about
Yeah.
you, Britt? Do you find the same? Is it comfortable for you to talk to people you know about outside of work, not in a work context? Is it how is it like for you?
Yeah, I think it sort of depends. I appreciate what you shared. It depends on the person. I've definitely been fortunate to find other dads who really care about these issues. One of the people is involved with Fathering Together, and we have like a dad's night once a month where we get together, and it's social, but we also talk about like what it's like to be a dad in this day and age, and how to try to support each other in that. So I've been really fortunate to find people, other dads who want to talk about this and who want to be vulnerable, right? Because I think a lot of that discomfort comes up because it's a vulnerable thing to talk about. And I mean, so I think I have found people that I do that with and I talk about that with, and that's been helpful for me to kind of get their insight and to let them know, like, I don't know what to do right now. Like, how did you figure this out? And just sort of admit that I'm lost, or, my partner and I are confused about this. But then there's other people, and sometimes it's family, and sometimes it's, where I don't have that relationship, or I don't feel like they're not asking those same questions. And so it would be I'm not sure how fruitful the conversation would be. And so I might bring up a topic and see where it goes, but not really push it. So I have like, the more that I can find organizations or other groups of dads who are trying to do this work, or other men who are doing this work, who may not even be dads, like, that's been most helpful, or most, where I've found the most growth, is to like seek that out, and just kind of like hold on to those people where I can have those deeper conversations with.
Okay. Davud.
Can I just,
Sure.
before Davud comes in, can I just come in very quickly? Because I just realized that Joseph Samuelin was asking about personal interactions and not in a work context. So,
Yes.
I mean, in personal interactions, it does tend to get a little bit easier because it's there's a greater degree of familiarity and an easiness in the relationship. But that's the plus side, and the minus side, in a sense, the negative side is that they tend to also be more forthright about how disciplinarian they are as fathers, or how patriarchal they are as fathers, and then it's a it's almost like a sign of social appropriateness, if you wish, that they have to be that way, and that's a wall that's very difficult to get through. It's sometimes even more difficult than to do it personally than to do it in a work context, where they might listen to you as a professional more easily than they would listen to you as a friend or as a relative.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
get that. Yeah, go ahead. Go on, Davud.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what I learned, this time when I talk in the personal life, I give a little disclaimer before I start the conversation. I say, hey, listen, I'm not attacking your beliefs. I'm just curious about the truth. And then I start asking questions just to see the point of view, how he see the world, and then I say how I see the world. And we're just talking the right way in a curiosity of truth. And I'm not, as you are really good said, it's difficult because sometimes people just think, hey, you are attacking my belief. This is what I believe. But no, I just say, hey, listen, I'm not attacking your belief. It's everything okay. Just curious about the truth about your point of view in that way. So this is what I learned how I approach now. Before was really difficult because I didn't know how to start to talk with someone in that way, because most of the time people just closed. in personal life, yeah, when you are in a work context, it's different because people came to change something. But in a personal, they just start closing, and then I give this disclaimer before I start the conversation.
Okay.
Good idea.
Yeah. Well, okay, but speaking about, not being able to talk about this and internalizing, patriarchal societies are not just deadly for women and girls, they're also damaging for men and boys because they enforce toxic and destructive norms, including teaching boys to use violence to resolve problems, to treat women and girls as inferiors, as we mentioned, and to not admit their feelings, to not be able to show their emotions. Let's start with Britt first. What kind of effect do you see this having on boys and men mentally and emotionally? And what do you think fathers can do to effectively prevent or counteract such cultural programming in their sons in particular?
Yeah, super important question. I think it's a really toxic masculinity is very damaging just to the society as a whole, and it's violent. It affects men and women very differently, and so I don't want to, I don't think I'm not trying to compare them, but I think that a lot of times we don't acknowledge just how harmful it is to men, because it's a way of maintaining like that patriarchal society or that male privilege, and so it is. But as a therapist, I see this a lot in terms of men coming in for therapy and not really having the ability to connect to their emotions, and having this sort of myth that they need to be in control. Or they need to control others or dominate others, and then not, being able to do that, and then getting depressed or acting out, and sort of just the only sort of emotion that they can express is anger, and they don't know how to really communicate their needs or their emotions in a way that really sets them up to be in a healthy relationship with anyone, right? So there's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of pain that just gets internalized either as depression or it gets externalized as violence, right? And as many of you know, we have a huge issue with violence in the U.S. We have mass shootings or school shootings. It's sick just to think about how frequently that happens. And that combination of the access to weapons and guns specifically, and the inability for men to be able to express their emotions in healthy ways and to reach out and get that support, it's just this really negative combination of factors that leads to just an extremely violent society. Domestic violence, violence against women, sexual violence, and then physical or sort of like gun violence. So it's like a really nasty cocktail that we have in the U.S. and I think that's why it's so important to be talking to my son and both my children about this. And helping them see how damaging it is, and how harmful toxic masculinity is. And so, and really, I think what both of you have said already about sort of living in a different way, sort of living by example and being a role model, because kids are just sponges and they're soaking it all up. So if I am talking about how toxic masculinity is a bad thing, but then I'm sort of perpetuating that in my actions, like that's what they're seeing and that's what they're focusing on. So I have to have integrity when I do this, and I have to do that work for myself. So I'm not sending a mixed message where I'm saying please respect women, but then I'm not respecting their mother, right, or my partner or other family members. So I have to really, it's like that inner work, and then it's about being consistent with that message in my behaviors. And that doesn't mean being perfect, but when I do make a mistake, it means I have to talk about that with them and say, like, or if I yell at them, if I get upset at them, and I have, it's important for me to come back and say, I apologize, like I messed up, and I'm not perfect, and it's okay to make mistakes, and but like it's important to also repair that harm and to like reestablish that connection, so that they know it's okay to have these strong emotions and feelings, but that they don't default to acting violently or to hurting others, and then not caring about the impact of their actions.
Yeah, and I suppose for young children, especially, well, for anyone, for any age, especially, a role model is a good thing to see how your father, for a boy to see how their father acts, is the best way, I suppose. Davud, question for you. What kind of effect do you think this has on? Have you seen it have on the men that you've spoken to, and what can you do to counteract such programming in your son?
Yeah, here Britt really good said that if he told to his son behave nice to women and then he do opposite, it's not good. But I will agree also here that if you say to your son, hey, don't be nice to women, and then you watch television programs that give violence, the television, I have one rule for myself, that curiosity is growth, and closed mind, it's dying. So if you're not growing, you are dying. That's it. That's the rule. That's the nature. And when I saw the television, if you're going to consciously look all that ads, and not just ads, but all that movies, you will see they're just telling you violence good, violence good, and this is program that we all get. And then this is what I realized with men who come to my program, is that I see that they have what's just happening. It's very good said, is depression or violence. And this is two programs that are already in. And if I give you a trigger, bam, I trigger one of these. If you go in depression, okay. If I trigger the same behavior, you can be violent. So what I do, I control what my kids watching. This is the first step. What I did, it's controlling what's my kids watching. What kind of because you will not believe, but I found cartoons are also violence. There are a lot of cartoons that I watched as a kid, and then I go to find them and I analyze them. The behavior inside the cartoon is just telling, hey, be violent, it's okay, no problem, but it's not okay. So what I did is first I control, like Britt said, I show it from my example, then I control what I'm watching, then I control what my kids watching, because all that affect our behavior. We all already have inside of us an anchor to emotion. Okay, it's like orange juice. When I teach men, you create emotions. It's like an orange. If you squeeze it, you will get juice. What you do with that juice? You drink it. You're not throwing away. So it's same here. If I squeeze you on your trigger, you will give me an anger. You will give me depression. Oh, you will give me happiness, love, compassion, passion for life. It's just in a way what you anchor yourself to. And this is and about emotions. There was a lot of talking about the real men don't show their emotions. The real men don't cry. And I ask them when they come to program. I ask them, listen, when you were born, did you cry? Or you came to world in a style? Hey, what's up? I'm here. See? So stop with that. That's not real, because you cry when you're born. So what's up? You're not a real man, and that's great. We don't have to be. Life is not about to be a real man. Life is about to be a loving man, to be a compassionate man, to be a conscious man in that way. So this is how I approach to myself. I get a lot of different emotions in myself because of my past, what happened to me, but I now see it as a way that I learn a lot of from all that emotions. And when I see how not to control my emotions, that's not the point, because emotions are messages. They told you, if I yell, like Britt said, if I yell to my kid, that means that I'm not angry, that means that I'm scared. I ask myself, when I yell to her, I ask me, okay, are you scared? Are you angry? In 90%, I was scared that something happened to her. Then I said, okay. Now, my friend, you have a recipe how to be scared. What you have to do to be scared? You can use that recipe to be happy. You can use that recipe to be compassion. So we all have recipe inside us how to be scared, how to be depressed, how to create violence. We have that recipe. If I ask you, give me a recipe to be angry, you can say, okay, first I imagine that someone is going to hurt me. Okay, that's the first step. So you imagine, even it's not happening. So in that way, I teach people, don't go in a future with something will happen to you or someone will hurt you. This is just something that didn't happen yet. But go in the future with curiosity. How can you change your approach to life and use your emotion to listen that help you, that understand other people in that way. So what I'm also teaching my kids is to understand. I teach my daughter in a way that she understand why someone do something to her. If I don't know if her little brother, but okay, he's still baby. If he throw something and just hit her, and she start crying, I say, okay, it's okay to cry, everything's fine, but now ask yourself what he
Why?
lacking, what kind of lack he have to do that to you. Because I was hurting people, because I was hurt in my past as a kid. I was hurt, and if I came from the place of I called hurt place, then you can hurt other people. If you came from place curiosity, hey, what happened to you, my friend, that you're behaving like that to me? So in that way,
I think
that
is
way,
examining yourself. Then you need to
yeah,
examine yourself and figure out exactly what's going on.
yes.
Yeah. PK, do you? What has your experience been? What kind of effects have you seen toxic masculinity have on people that you've men that you've encountered, and how have you taught your son how to counter this?
I'm going to be a little controversial here, a little
Oh, okay.
provocative. I I don't think the problem is violence. I think the problem is the gendering of violence. I don't think that there are situations that can be handled without violence, and there are lots of survival situations where you have to be violent. And what I try to teach my children is not to be afraid of violence. And I'm talking about both my kids, my son and my daughter. I think it's to make a sort of fetish of non-violence is a bad idea. It leads you to a position of passiveness and of vulnerability. I think it's important to it's very, very important to degender violence. It is very, very important to stop associating masculinity with violence or femininity with violence for that matter. I think it's important to see violence as just another form of expressing oneself, sometimes defending oneself, but in a way that I'll tell you what I'm trying to say is that I insist on my children not being aggressive. And there's a difference between being violent and being aggressive, right? You can, and of course, no first use. You will not be violent as a first form of, expressing yourself. But if you are caught in a situation, and unfortunately, Delhi is, in that sense, a very violent place. You will need to be able to defend yourself, right? So
But there is a
when
difference
we
between defending yourself and, like you said, resorting to violence as the first form of emotional
exactly,
expression, which
exactly,
unfortunately tends to happen with men more than women.
yes, and I think that the reason for that is because um, men are expected to be violent in almost every culture, even if men don't want to be violent. And I know lots of men who
Yeah.
would not want to resort to violence, but who would say that, well, it was expected of me to be macho, to be aggressive, to be, you know, in your face and being violent in that way.
How
So
did how did you teach your son to not think that way then?
interestingly, through training him to sending him for training in martial arts, and that
Oh,
actually converts the sense of controlling your body, physically training your body to use violence simply in a very instrumental way. So you can defend yourself, you can protect yourself from harm, where you use your body in that way, but it doesn't become a means of articulating your emotions and expressing your
Mm-hmm.
anger and becoming a way to harm someone for the sake of harming someone.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a very fit person. He's uh, very confident as a result of that. But he is, I mean, if anything, even more sensitive towards uh, violence than uh, anybody else I know. And he's very particular about how he treats women and his sister and so on. So I think that distinction is very necessary, and it's something that we need to see made more often. That it's not about violence; it's about aggression. It's about
Mm-hmm.
gendering the way in which aggression and violence are treated, right? And realizing that sometimes it's okay to be violent, especially when your life is in danger or you're facing bodily harm. It's not okay to say I'm non-violent and get beaten up. You know, I don't think that's a good idea at all, whether you're a man or a woman.
Okay, I think I understand what you mean. So we have to move on a little. We've been
Yeah,
talking for a
sure.
long time. So let's talk about consent. Consent is a very important subject when you're talking about parenting. Uh, Understanding the importance of consent, especially sexual consent, is one of the most important conversations that you can have with your sons. How do you talk to sons about consent? And do you have any suggestions to fathers who want to talk to their sons about consent but have no idea where or when to begin? Let's go with PK first.
Um, I think it's important to realize that sexual consent is very different from any other kind of consent. Sexual consent is an ongoing, continuous, repeated form of consent. It can be withdrawn at any time, and it legitimately can be withdrawn at any time. And it's very important for boys, for men to understand this and to respect it. At the same time, it's also, I think, something that we tend not to see. The idea of giving consent puts the person giving consent, whether it's a man or a woman, in the position of someone who is passive, or in the position of someone to whom a sexual act or on whom a sexual act is being committed, right? So I think it's important for us to also convey to our sons, especially, the possibility of flipping that around and saying, look, uh, would you consent to being active and taking a sexual agency into your hands, and choosing what you want to do, and being the way you want to be sexually, and
Mm.
then it's not so much about giving consent, it's much more mutual. I think that's just my take on it, but yeah,
Okay.
I think, yeah.
When do you think it's the right appropriate time to start teaching sexual consent?
um
I know it's a bit of a
I
loaded
don't
question.
think there is a no, I think it's an important question, but I don't think there's any one moment when you can suddenly say, okay, son, let's sit down and talk about the birds and the bees and so on.
Yeah.
It's probably better to be open about sexuality from uh, the childhood itself, and that creates an environment in the house where the child can talk freely about sexual matters and
Mm.
without shame or embarrassment, which is a real damper. It's very difficult to overcome those and still feel that you are being gender just. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
I'm going to put you on the spot here, PK,
Yeah.
because again, the Asian perspective, it's difficult for parents to talk to their children about these kind of things. How
Yeah.
did you talk to your son about this?
I think my partner had a major role to play there, in the
Okay.
sense that we never ever allowed a sense of shame or embarrassment to come into conversations about sex in our household. And that's something that actually I had much more difficulty overcoming and learning to accept and learning to cope with and to to practice myself. And I'm very grateful that it's happened that way, because as a result, I think in our home at least, there's a great deal of freedom when it comes to, and a lot of respect for sexual choice and sexual practices and so on.
Okay, let's go to Britt.
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. I think it's so important. And I also want to just circle back really quickly to what Davud was saying about like the media and how that is such a huge influence on both gender like development and like, you know, what we've been talking about around like sexuality. When I think back to what I learned about sexuality, a lot of it was through movies and through the media in terms of what it is to be a sexual male. And I've had to unlearn a lot of that in my own marriage. And it's because, you know, like the media it really reinforces this sort of rape culture that objectifies women and that makes sexual violence normal and leads, I think, a lot of men to feeling like entitled to sort of their own sort of sexual needs and desires and fantasies and stuff, and it's very harmful. So like talking about consent from an early age, you know, I have, like I said, I have a 3-year-old. It was just a few weeks ago that we were reading a book called The Pout Pout Fish, which is about this fish that is really sort of depressed and thinks it's, you know, really down, and then all of a sudden this other fish comes in and kisses it, and we read the book, and my son enjoyed the book, and then I said, like, you know, what do you think about that? Like when how would you feel if someone just came up and kissed you? Because this fish doesn't actually ask if it's okay. She just sort of swims in and kisses the fish. And you know, we talked about, I introduced the concept of consent and said, you know, it's really important. We don't kiss people unless we ask, like, are you okay with me giving you a kiss, or can I give you a kiss, right? That consent is like, it is like, you know, you were saying, Jen, like that it needs to be mutual, right? And that the other person needs to, you know, give their okay. And so, you know, we talked about that, and I wanted to make sure that he was okay, that he was starting to get that concept. And we also talk about, like, you know, you are the boss of your own body. And my partner, Megan, is better at this than me, but just sort of asking, like, can I give you a hug? You know, would you like to cuddle? That kind of thing. And just giving them that autonomy over their body and saying, like, you know, you have a right, or you have a choice over to sort of decide kind of what happens to your body, as a way of then making that connection that other people have that too, that they need to treat others the way they want to be treated in terms of getting their consent. So I think those are some of the ways that we've started talking about this at an early age. And I agree. I think it's a very nuanced discussion, especially as children become start to engage and express their sexuality. And so, like, it's going to get a lot more involved once our children get to that age. But starting it now is a way of kind of building up that that foundation so that it's a much easier conversation. And it's not about shame, right? But it's about, this is you expressing part of who you are as a human being. And we want to affirm that, and we want you to do it in a way that's healthy for both yourself and certainly for your partners or the people that you engage with.
Okay. Davud, let's go to you.
Yes, same as Brit. We ask if can I hug you, especially to my daughter, because son is still a little. But yeah, in that way, we are starting with that foundation that ask for permission, and because I found, not that comparing my kids with cats, we have cats too, but there's an awesome quote about cats that say, you don't own them, they choose you. And I see the same as my kids. I don't own them, I don't own their bodies, they choose me for this life to be here. I will find a reason why, but yeah, in that way. So I know that they choose me, and my responsibility is that I get a permission to hug them, that I get permission to show them the way that they can also treat others in that way. So yeah, in that
Would
way.
you, because you're, like you said, your son is very, very young now, would you teach him the same way that you taught your daughter, or is it a specific thing that you would teach your son? That you plan to teach your son?
I will teach him in the same way because I really want that they both get the same instructions, that they get both get the same approach, because it's really important to me that live, let live, and in a way that he will understand that, yeah, like Brett said, someone have to ask you if he can give you a kiss, not just came and give you a kiss. And it's the same. And also he will have to ask, hey, can I hug you? Can I give you a kiss? In that way, not just, hey, you're my tool, if I can say that way, and I own you. And no, this is what I learned from a lot of men. Also, like a Brit said, I had the same problems with all that sexuality in a way, because I was also have problems with addiction to pornography, and this is one of the I say more challenging way to understand difference between you are programming that way, but you can choose to be a different, and this is not what is sex about. Not about what you learn from all that television, what you learn from all that, because there's a lot of ads and billboards that are just programming. It's okay to show your body. It's okay to be naked. Come on. So in that way, yeah, I'm going in that way. That from my, I say, from my not mistakes, to give them what I learned from myself and others, and to give them the most I say important knowledge that I get. Then, but the choice is theirs. But I believe if I prepare them for the world, for all that influence in the world, if they approach the influence in a way, start questioning, is this okay for me? Is these people really want me? That I'm good? I believe that everything will be okay.
We have a very interesting question from Men Challenging. Let me put it up on screen. So fathers are often asked how they would feel if their daughter were a victim, but rarely, if ever, how dads would feel if their sons committed domestic violence or sexual violence. How would you here feel or react in that case if your son had committed some violence? Davud.
Okay, as I said, I will get back to my strategy or framework. Like Britt said, I will find out what kind of behavior triggered what happened that triggered that behavior in my son to do that. And then I will start also with myself to see how I'm behaving. Okay, in that way, I will not react in a way that yelling or something like that. I will find that pain, because if I find the pain, I can change it. I can change if something is in me that I showing him to do that, then I'm going to change myself. Yeah, in a way of emotion, if Men Challenging asking in a way of emotion, yeah, when you heard something like that, it's not easy to process that, because if someone was a victim of that kind of approach, as I said, it's not easy to process that as a parent. But if you go in a way to ask some questions that will reveal the answers that can help, I believe that we can change that behavior in the future, that my son will not do anything like that anymore, and my girl will not become a victim, because I will also go to that, I would say, that man who did that, and start changing him. Sometimes I ask myself, yeah, maybe I will really do something to that man, but hey, what are we going to get? I will just be a bad person. So because yeah, you have to have self-defense. I agree that way, but I will definitely also see what happened to that man, because if I, like I said, if I spark more fires around me, and that is positive fire, then we can live in a nice society. If I spread the violence, then I cannot teach anything.
Britt, how would you feel?
I would feel a sense of like failure. I would feel a sense of shame. I would feel like the I mean, obviously, I'm not, like we said, we can't control our children. We can't control anyone except for our own self. But like, I would feel like a lot of what I've tried to teach my child, my son, that I would not have succeeded in that if that happened. I would still love my son. I would still love my child. There's nothing that they could do that would make me stop loving them. But it would really cause me a serious reckoning, and I would be grieving. I would certainly go back to therapy and have to like work through some stuff, and I would really need to work through stuff with my child. And like Davud said, like try to support them in figuring out what went wrong and what happened and why this happened. Because I think I would want them to find a way to repair that harm and to try to heal themselves, right? So I think it would be very, very painful and sad.
Okay. PK?
It's a very difficult question, and fortunately, I haven't had to face that situation. But I can go by my experience with a student, and a teacher-student relationship can be something like a parent-child relationship. So in that particular instance, I tried to bring the like Davud said, and I think Britt also said, to see what caused the violence. Try and locate the source of the problem. And in the case that I'm talking about, it was actually a case of unrequited love, and he was infatuated with this girl, and she didn't really want to have anything to do with him, and so he sort of got into this harassment mode, and then she came up to me and complained about this happening and so on. Very common kind of situation. But when I spoke to him, it turned out that he was himself from a broken home, and was experiencing unrequited love in the sense from within the home itself, So it's a kind of transference, if you wish, that was happening, and I then, of course, helped to get him into to see a counselor and therapy and so on. But when it's one's own son, I think the issue would be much more complex and much more difficult to deal with, because as Britt said, the first thing would be, I think, a sense of failure that would strike me as a parent, and that would probably interfere with anything that I can do or can attempt to do to help my son, and I think the first challenge there would be to try and overcome that sense of failure, to see that perhaps it's neither of us who's at fault, perhaps, I don't know. I mean, perhaps the real agenda here should be to not try and locate blame, but responsibility. Taking responsibility doesn't necessarily mean, feeling blamed and feeling guilty and feeling tortured by that sense of doing something wrong. But I think a sense of responsibility allows you to face what you've done and to
Fix the
cope
problem.
with, to fix the problem, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good answers, all of you. So I'm actually going to get to my last question. We've been talking for almost an hour and a half, believe it or not. So here's the final one or two questions. Do you have any particular tips and suggestions for fathers and fathers-to-be who want to raise feminist sons? And I'm going to tack on to that something, a question from one of our audience members who wanted to know any examples of actual language that you would use to challenge entrenched views. What do you actually say or do? So let's start with Piki and go to Davud and end with Britt.
Wow.
How do you raise feminist sons, or what would you actually say?
You start by being feminist yourself, or pro-feminist, or whatever label you want to call it. But I think it works best through example, as was discussed earlier as well. Unless you yourself behave in a certain way, there's absolutely no justification for you to push a particular point of view. Your son or your daughter can turn around and say, well, you don't do it, so why should we? So it's very important to start with, like they say, charity begins at home. So you start with yourself and ensure that what you do becomes an exemplary sort of way of being for your child. But at the same time, I would also say that it's very important to allow the child, whether it's your son or daughter, to come to feminism on their own terms, rather than trying to set it as a kind of, ideal that they should aspire to, or that they should inculcate in themselves. Lay it out as look, this stuff is good, and why don't you think about it like this? Of course, it helps you to be a boy in so many ways, but what about this, and how does it work like this? So allow them to think about it, give them the questions to guide them into seeing those positions for themselves.
Okay.
As far as the language goes, I think the best kind of language would really be a language of affection and warmth and compassion, which helps, much more than a kind of preachy or should, must kind of language. I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's the closest I can come to answering that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, but I know what you mean. Everybody's different, and everybody would have a different approach. So you should really do what you're comfortable with, and use the language that you think is best for your child, and that you are comfortable with. Davud, what about you? How do you teach your son to be feminist, and what would you say to him?
As I said, the first step for me is that you have to find your own rule about that, what that means to you. Okay, if you get some meaning to that, then you will get emotion back. Okay, if that means good to you, then you will feel good about it, and your actions will be guided from that emotion. That's important. That's what really important was for me. If I want to teach him something, then I have to know what that mean to me. So I get in that way of approach, and the language I use is in a way that I ask questions. You probably already heard that a lot. In a way that I ask questions, that I see how he's thinking right now, and what kind of point of view can I change in his direction. If we see a woman in like this, then I have to see why he's doing that. So the language I use is in a way that how I talk with my girlfriend, if my language respectful. because he's hearing. This is auditory. He's hearing. He visualize. He see. And even if you can do an exercise, imagine that you are put this headphones or something to your kid in his ears, and then behave in a way you want to see you, how you behave to your spouse or girlfriend or wife, and then take that ear phones out and close his eyes, and then talk to your wife that you want, the way you want he hear you, how you talk to your wife. Okay, that's exercise will really bring the reality of you, and you will see how you talk, and you will see how you behave, and your kid can learn from behavior, and your kid can learn from listening. It's not important for him that he can see everything. He can hear yelling. So in that way, I will recommend, maybe for me, what helps me is that I use the strategy that I see what I believe about that, and then start using language in that way that support my belief, because belief is a feeling of certainty that something is certain. And for me, the certainty is that we are equal. We are same, the equal, no matter of gender, no matter what color, or like Brad said, no matter what's happening. If you believe that we all are equal, then your talk have to be the same like your walk. So you have to talk and walk in the same way. So don't talk in one way and walk in another way if you're not that way.
Britt?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I would definitely echo what you both said, and I would add, I think it's a very intentional process, because at least in the U.S., but I think kind of around the world, like we said, there's lots of patriarchal cultures, lots of sexism, both at an individual level and at the institutional level, or societal level. And so I think it's got to be a very active process. And I think starting as early as you feel ready to, it's really important to start having these conversations with children. And I, like I said before, we try to use this language of, sexism is a lie that says that men are better or more important or more powerful or more valuable than women. And, that's not true. And that lie is harmful. It harms women. It also can harm men. And really kind of be explicit. Children really need those explicit messages, because they're soaking in both like what we're doing in the family, but they're also soaking in what they're seeing on TV or in the cartoons or in books and stuff. And so they're making meaning all the time. And so I think really being explicit about feminism and is really important. So we try to, the books that we buy and the books that we read, we try to really be intentional about what we're presenting our children, so that their worldview is shaped in this way, not in like an ideological sense where we're trying to brainwash them, but that it's reinforcing like the messages that we're trying to give them. And I definitely think the questions that people have, that you've talked about, like using questions is a huge way of doing that. And I think the last thing I would just say is like building community. Like you can't do this alone. All right. If you are the most feminist man on the planet, but like the community you live in is very sexist and harming women, and the men in your life are incredibly toxic in terms of their masculinity, your kids are gonna pick up on that, and they're gonna be influenced by that, right? And so we can't do this alone. And so I think these organizations that are sponsoring this, that are out there, really getting connected and building that community, so they can see other men who are pro-feminist or who are feminist, that they can see other women who are feminist, of different ages and backgrounds, right? So there's other people that are reinforcing these messages, and you're not doing it alone, because that can just make you feel so isolated. I think the last thing I would say, because my partner, we were talking about this before today, she said the most important thing to her is that we teach boys to listen to women, and to hear women, and to see women, and to believe women, and to trust women, because her experience has been that living in a sexist society, that she doesn't feel those things, and that has been very painful. And so I think whatever we do, really trying to listen and hear women, because centering their experience is a way to free us all from sexism and from patriarchy and the ways in which we're harming them.
Okay, so that was our last question, and we ended on a good note, I think. Thank you very much, the three of you, three dads, for sharing your perspective with us. It was very interesting. Thank you, audience members, for the great questions. I think I didn't tell you guys just now, but there were a lot of comments about how interesting the discussion was, and how, you know, you've made them all think very hard about the things they do and the way they live. So that this is great, which is what we wanted. The objective of this panel, actually. So before I wrap up, I have a bunch of resources for everyone. So let's see if I can share this slide. Here we go. Okay, so here are a few resources that y'all can use. To find out more about violence against women, what you can do about it, please do visit the Pixel Project's website, www.thepixelproject.net. To find out more about the Fathers for Pixels program, we have a tab in the in our Pixel Project website. It's Dads for Pixels, and I think our chatbox moderator Xiaoqun should be sharing all these links with you now, so you can just click them. To learn more about Men Challenging's work, they do very important work, very interesting work. Please do visit www.menchallenging.com. And same with Fathering Together, they have very interesting programs. Please do visit www.fatheringtogether.org. So there are a lot of resources out there for anyone who wants to learn more about parenting, about how you can be a male ally. There's so many things you can do. Okay, so one last thing is, do any of you have any announcements to make? Britt, I think you said you had one.
Oh, I just wanted to say that part of my journey towards doing this work has been working with an organization that's called Organizing White Men for Collective Liberation. And they have a website as well. I can't remember it exactly off the top of my head, but if you are particularly located in the US, they have kind of monthly calls, and they have some really great resources for getting plugged in, so that you have that community and you're not feeling like you have to do this and figure this out all alone.
Okay.
I have one question. One question is not an answer, but just one question to leave all of us with that. What you want to be known for?
Okay, good.
That's
PK?
it.
PK, anything to add?
Important question, actually. Yeah, well,
Okay.
When I was asked to do this, one of the things that I did was cheat a little. I asked my son to sit with me and tell me what he got from me, and that was a wonderful experience. We had a really wonderful chat, and I really want to thank you for giving me that opportunity to get to know him and for him to get to know me better in that sort of way. So I was, in fact, going to make a suggestion that perhaps you could have a joint father-son thing where you could have people, not just fathers, but fathers and sons, speaking about their experience with
that's a good idea. We'll think about it for next
gender
year.
inequality. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, thank you, everybody, and think about what was it, Davud? What do you want to be known for? And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye to you, wherever you are in the world. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you all.